And finally, the last thing that we're going to check for and mess with and add into our program for this week is we want to actually make this game a little bit more like it's going to look in the final version. So we want to add in a bunch more gems, a bunch more baddies, so that way we can see each and every one of them on the screen in the way that they'll be doing. And then our last bit that I'll upload later on this week will involve adding in some movement for all of those baddies, and then checking when and if that game should be over. So the last things that we need to do right now is we're going to add in a lot more gems, a lot more baddies, and then we'll check them in the way that we had been doing down here, and we'll add in the actual game actions. All right, so with all of that in mind, let's start by, rather than having a setup and just creating one of our gems and one of our baddies and one of our players, we can keep the player exactly how it is. However, instead of having individual gems and baddies that we need to keep track of, it's going to be a little bit easier for us to have an array list of our gems and an array list of our baddies. So what we're going to actually do is we're going to make, an array list that will have a bunch of gem objects that we'll call gem list. And then we also should have an array list of all of our baddie objects that we'll call baddies list. Just like that. Okay, great. Which means that I don't need to think about my baddie individually and my gem individually. This is going to make things mad at me for a moment, but don't worry, we'll fix all of those errors later on. So we're going to have an array list of these types, which means I no longer should create an individual singular gem or an individual singular baddie. Now in setup, I need to finish the initialization of that gem list. It's going to be a new array list for me. And also for my baddie list, it's going to be a new array list. Great, okay. So now they exist. Of course, things down here are now upset with me because I'm not actually creating a singular object for our gems and our baddies, but now they exist. So in the moment right now, currently our gem list and our baddie list is empty, and we're going to want to add a bunch of gems and baddies to it. To keep it simple for right now, we're going to just go ahead and do that all in setup. We're just going to designate at the beginning how many gems are going to be, how many baddies they're going to be, and we'll just create them all at once. So for us, the easiest way to do that is just to make a for loop, and we're just going to create a bunch of gems and a bunch of baddies. Every time we go, each time we go through that for loop, we'll create one gem and one baddie, and then we'll loop over for however many times we want. So I'm just going to create a really generic for loop that starts at 0. It's going to go up until, I don't know, let's for right now say that we'll make 15 of each. So we'll have 15 gems and 15 baddies. So we're going to have a generic for loop that's going to then add gems and baddies to the list. So what we'll want to then do is we're going to want to say, okay, well, let's gem list and add whatever our gem object is going to be. And we'll want to do the same thing for our baddie list. Baddie list. We'll want to add whatever the object is going to be there. And because we're just going to add in a new object right in this way right here, I could go through the process of saying, let's make a gem. We'll call it G. Ooh, it's gems. Sorry, gems. And we'll call it G, and it'll be a new gem for me. And I'll add in all of the info here. I could add in, I don't know, 30, 30, 20, and then we'll provide it with a color. And I could do it like this, and then I would add G every time. But then if you notice, every single time, all of my gems that I add in would be at the exact same location, the exact same size. And then when I add them in, it's really not doing all that much. So instead of having them all preset to be at 30, 30, 20, likely we'd want their size and their color to remain the same. And for us right now, our gems are the red ones, so I'll make it at least be red for us. However, if we put them all at the same position, you won't even see that there's multiple of them. So likely what we want to do is we'll either want to have them increment throughout the screen and use the for loop to help us do that, or you can choose to have them be a random thing. So I think what'll be easier for us to do is to have them be random, and I'm going to do everything by creating variables first, and then I'll consolidate in a bit. So we're going to create an int that'll be an x value for us, And we're going to then use math.random to help us figure that out. Remember right now, math.random, what it's going to do is it's going to give us a decimal number or a double between 0 and 1. So like 0.6 would be a value that it could use. So we then need to multiply that value by whatever our distance is going to be. We don't want numbers between 0 and 1. We want numbers that are going to be between 0 and the width of the board. So we'd actually want to multiply by that width. And then we need to cast this to be the integer value of all of that. Multiply it by the width and then turn it into an integer so that it stretches it out so that random number is now not between 0 and 1, it's between 0 and 600. It would be a decimal to start with, but then we'll cast it to be an integer with that last little bit, and now we have a random number between 0 and 600. And then finally we could do that same thing. Well, I'm just going to copy that exact same thing for our y direction, our y variable. However, this time, instead of using width, technically we would use height in case, in the off chance, later on we change the size of the game board, or it's no longer a 600 by 600 square and it becomes a rectangle. So then what I would want to do is I can throw in that x and that y, and now each time I run through that for loop, it'll be at a new xy position, and then we'll go ahead and keep its size as 20 and its color for right now as that 255, meaning 25500, meaning that it's red. Okay, great. So that's the way we can do that. And now we're going to do that same thing. However, this time for the baddie, I'm going to do it in the shortened, without all of these extra lines version. I can actually add everything in right here into this. So I do not actually need to create a new variable for that gem. So all I'm going to do is inside of here, let them know that the thing that I'm adding is going to be a new baddie object. And then I'll put in the three things like we did before. So I'll put in 30, 30, 20, and then I'll add in its color, which is blue. So 255, like that. And baddie list is happy to add in that new baddie at that position. However, like we said before, we then want to randomize that x and y. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this bit right here. That is that x direction right here. And then I'm going to copy this bit right there to be our y direction right there. And now I've got all on one line. Add a new baddie with a random x, a random y. Its size is going to be 20. Its color is going to be blue. And it's all done on one line rather than being done in 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the shortened version if you want to go to that. If you want to keep the math.random something separate so that way you can change that logic later, that's fine as well. If you want to keep it all 4 lines, cool by me, but I just wanted to show you both versions. So what this should hopefully do is, now when we run this program, we should hopefully see lots and lots. Oops, we have collision detection that we need to get rid of first. So let's go ahead and just comment this out for a moment. But hopefully what should happen once we get to the program actually running, we should see now lots and lots of gems and lots of baddies on our screen. And uh-oh, we see none. Oh yeah, because guess what? We've made a list of them, but we've done nothing on our graphics. So great, they exist. There's a list of them. There are now 15 gems and 15 baddies that exist in the list, but that's all that they are for us right now. We then have to go through and actually draw them all out. And the easiest way to do this, again, would be to use some for loops so that we can access all of the things inside. And for right now, particularly, we're going to use what we call a for each loop, which we learned about before in class, which is in this fashion. You say for, and now what I really want to do is I want to be able to say for each element in gem list. And what I mean by that is go through, get the first element in that gem list, which is a gem, do some stuff with it, then move on to the next element in the gem list, which is also still a gem, and keep going. So what I'm really saying is for each individual gem, which we'll call, I don't know, G, that exists inside of our gem list. That's the way that we want to read that notation, but that's the way that we type out the syntax of a for each loop. So go get that first gem that we'll call G inside of gem list. We'll do some stuff with it and then continue moving forward. Go get that next element. We'll momentarily call it G and we'll do some stuff with it. So that's our for each loop to access all the gems in gem list. To draw them, really. Okay, so when we draw them out, what we really want to do is the first thing we want to make sure happens is that we fill with a G dot color to make sure that we have the right color, and then we're going to draw a rectangle at that G dot X, G dot Y, G dot size twice over, because remember in this rectangle, the last two commands, we need the X, we need the Y, we need the width, and we need the height of that rectangle. So we'll go in and we'll say for each gem in the gem list, draw in there, and let's check that out. So now hopefully we should see lots of red gems showing up. And look at that, yes we do. If I close this and I ran it again, they should show up at new random locations, and of course they do. Some of them overlap. If you want to add in logic to not make them overlap, you can do that as well. But now we have all of that logic going. So now we're going to do that same thing. We'll do a for each loop on baddie list. So we'll say for baddies, but we'll call B, that are in our baddies list. And again, we'll want to fill with the correct color. So for us, this will be B dot color this time. And then we'll want to draw in that rectangle that for us will be B dot X, B dot Y, B dot size, B dot size. What did I do here? There we go. All right, and now we should see some blue and red rectangles show up randomly on that screen. And yes, we do. Great. And again, if I reran this, they should show up at a new random position every single time, because their locations have been randomized from the beginning. Hey y'all, quick moment of transparency. So I made an oopsies. I am bouncing back and forth between using some of the videos from last year's class and some new videos. If you've noticed in some of the old videos, you will see another tab up here called Game Object. Last year we learned about the idea of inheritance during Intro Java, so we were making this project using inheritance. We didn't learn about that this year, and that's okay, so now I'm trying to make some edits without having to remake everything. However, in that process, I switched from using the singular and the plural version of the words for the objects. So this year I'm using gem and baddie as my object variable names. Last year I called them gems and baddies. So if you've noticed, that looks a little bit different. So be sure that you are being consistent with yourself. You could call them gems plural or gem singular, does not make a difference. You choose, but just be consistent with yourself and be careful while you're watching these videos. I'm so sorry about that. So if you're being consistent with yourself and using the singular, make sure that we do that. Oops, don't delete the curly brace. The other thing that you will notice is when I made the gem variable this year, I immediately threw in that value variable and that damage variable, which I didn't do initially last year. So we need to add in another input when we create our gem and when we create our baddie, so that way we have the value and the damage being input. Okay, so now if we change this back to gem and we change this back to singular baddie, we're good to go, we're up to date. That's taking care of all of the errors that are up here. You might still have some errors in your code, and we'll talk about where those are coming from in just a second, but this part up at the top now looking a lot better. Okay, so we are almost there. Likely, later on, all of our baddies are going to move. In order for those baddies to move, we would want to use the baddies move method, which right now is empty and blank, and that's okay. We're going to add that one in the next video. But we want to be able to, as soon as we draw that rectangle, call the move method for each one of our baddies. So inside of that for each loop for our baddies, we're going to say b.move, so that way we could move each one of our baddies. So they'll start to move in their pattern. Also, we want to check for the collision detection, like we had down here. This is where the rest of your errors might be coming from. We used to check the collision detection with that singular G1 gem, but then we deleted that G1 gem and replaced it with an array list of gems. So rather than individually for G1, then G2, then G3, we're going to go inside of that for each loop, and for each gem in gem list, check that collision. So now that means instead of checking it with G1, I'm checking it with plain old G, because that is the momentary or instance variable name for the variable inside of gem list that we momentarily get. Now, to be clear, because this was maybe not actually taught syntax, this might be brand new syntax for you. What a for each loop is doing is it's taking away two pieces for you. We used to say for int LOC equals 0, LOC is less than our gem list dot size, and then we would increment that location. And then the first line of our program, or inside of that for loop, would say gem g equals, and then we would go get from the gem list the location that we were at. So these two lines of code right here are done all in one line using this type of for each loop. So you are looping over and incrementing across gem list, and you're getting that thing out of the gem list and calling it G all in a very short amount of code right here. Just a quick clarity about that for each loop. Okay, and then finally the last thing is doing that same collision detection check for our baddies inside of the for each loop now. And again, we no longer have B1, we just have plain old B because of the for each loop. And there we go. So this time when we run our program, what we expect to see is a bunch of gems, a bunch of baddies, and when we collide with one of them, if you notice right away it says that I'm colliding with one, so I'm going to be stuck forever in this game. Ooh, that's a flaw that we might want to work out later. But when I run it again, if I collide with a baddie, I get reset. Lovely. And if I can make it through the maze, if I collide with a gem, the gem respawns somewhere else, and I can continue moving around, and my printouts down at the bottom are letting me know that I am in fact colliding with some gems. Collide with the next baddie, reset, and there we go.